and I'm going to start with Egypt. And my first point is that while I applaud many of the global leaders, including my own administration's very articulate support for the pro-democratic movements and the opposition and the forces for democracy in Egypt and Tunisia and elsewhere, I worry just a bit that very little conversation has occurred, at least publicly, about the fact that Egypt isn't ready for elections. Popular elections do not a democracy make. And we forget in our own history that the tyranny of the majority and the tyranny of the popular, the more organized, and the more vocal is not what democracy is about. Democracy is about values, it's about institutions, and it's about rule of law. And that is not something that we hear a lot about in our appropriate and our absolutely right support for the reform movements in Egypt and elsewhere. I also worry that our current dialogue globally places way too much on the shoulders of the Egyptian army, an institution that rightfully is respected by the majority of the Egyptians, that is a capable institution, but is not an institution that is equipped to run elections, or even if there were free and fair elections in the future for Egypt, certainly is not the institution that is either equipped or prepared to sustain the results of such a democratic achievement. I applaud the administration's recent announcements that Egypt time is the time in which these reformations should take place. If that reform is democratic institutions, again, we return to the idea of protection of the masses against the tyranny of the majority, protections of the rights of freedoms and democracy, processes, and again, rule of law. These are institutions, parties, and apparatuses that take a long time to develop. Mubarak, there's certainly a lot to criticize, particularly regarding his slow reforms over the years and his inattention to human rights and a myriad of other things. But equally important is recognition that the Mubarak regime has been a good neighbor and a good ally. In many respects, stable Egypt has been the linchpin upon which Israel, over the last 30 years, has been a secure country. Similarly, it has been a bulwark of stability for the region and a good ally to the United States. We've been a bit remiss, I believe, in recognizing those facts. Majority rule that are not either in the favor of US or regional stability, but quite frankly, not favorable solutions for their own countries. These democratic stirrings, if you will, may bring about profoundly undemocratic results. And I'll repeat that. The democratic stirrings in Egypt and elsewhere may bring about profoundly undemocratic results. We must support these movements, but we cannot do so without sacrificing, first and foremost, our intelligence relationships. Secondly, our military relationships. Thirdly, particularly with Egypt, the critical support we get for counterterrorism. And then finally, regional stability. Do not underestimate the consequences of reform, particularly reform that is premature as these governments should. The decisions we are making now will have profound consequences for our children and grandchildren. And while President Perez is entirely right that there are a lot of opportunities here, I would also submit that there are some very difficult, hard decisions that must be made now. And those decisions are, if you think it's hard to deal with burgeoning democratic movements with the region as unstable as it is now, how do you think that those decisions are going to look when you have a nuclear Iran with a Persian nuclear weapon, and the very likelihood that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and perhaps other countries similarly are nuclear armed?